Imagine you are holding a dusty vintage book in your hands. You blow the dust off the cover, and as you open it, you realize it contains not just one, but a complete labyrinth of mysteries.
A very dark labyrinth, really.
Exactly. Today we are opening the pages of the book named Miss Marple's Final Cases book by Agatha Christie.
It is quite the collection.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive into the source material is highly specific. We're going to unpack the absolute brilliance of Christie's shortest, sharpest narratives. We aren't just here to recount who did what to whom.
Right, you already know how a classic whodunit operates.
Yeah, we want to extract the hidden nuggets of human psychology, the weaponization of societal blind spots, and the sheer genius of deduction hidden right within these pages.
It's fascinating how a gentle, elderly spinster from a quiet English village can consistently outsmart the most hardened criminals.
And the official police force. Just by sitting quietly and observing human nature.
She really does just sit and watch.
She does. So we've got a fantastic stack of sources for you today. A collection of Christie's short stories featuring the iconic Jane Marple, plus a couple of really eerie supernatural outliers.
Those outliers completely subvert the cozy mystery genre.
They really do. And we are also looking at a fascinating analytical essay by Charles Osborne that provides the historical backdrop for these tales.
Which is crucial context. This collection matters immensely to you, the listener, today, precisely because it transcends the traditional puzzle box format.
How so?
Well, we often think of these classic mysteries as just comfortable entertainment. A cup of tea and a comforting resolution where order is restored. But there's so much more than that.
They really are.
These stories are rigorous masterclasses in critical thinking. They teach us about the very real dangers of ignoring the obvious in a world that is saturated with complex information.
Right, like how cognitive biases just completely blind us.
Exactly, how we look without actually seeing. Christie is demonstrating that the darkness of the world isn't always out there in some exotic locale. It's right next door.
In the village. Residing in the seemingly innocent neighbor you've known for years. Okay, let's unpack this. Because right out of the gate, we have a meta-mystery on our hands regarding the source material itself.
The title itself is a bit of a trick.
It is. The very title of the book is Deliberate Deception, or at least a masterclass in marketing misdirection. Looking at Charles Osborne's essay, he points out that this collection was published in the UK in 1979. But these aren't actually Miss Marple's final cases at all.
Not chronologically, no.
Right, and not thematically either. They are mid-career stories published in various U.S. magazines over the years, just gathered for a UK release.
And to add another layer of dissonance, two of the stories included.
Oh yeah, The Dressmaker's Doll and In a Glass Darkly.
Exactly. They don't even feature Miss Marple. They are complete structural and tonal outliers.
So why do you think a publisher would bundle mid-career anomalies and non-Marple psychological thrillers under such a definitive title? Like, why call it final?
It's a brilliant question, and it really offers a fascinating look into the publishing world and the phenomenon of the author as an inescapable brand. To understand this, we have to look at the staggering success of Agatha Christie.
I mean, she is outsold only by the Bible and Shakespeare.
Right. Over 2 billion copies sold in over 100 languages. When a creator reaches that level of total cultural saturation, their work transcends a simple timeline.
The brand just takes over.
Precisely. Publishers, especially after an author passes away, tend to curate posthumous content with highly dramatic titles like Final Cases. It creates an event for a grieving public, hungry for one more encounter with a beloved character.
It puts her sheer output into perspective when you look at the timeline Osborne lays out. She wrote The Murder of Roger Ackroyd back in 1926.
A structural masterpiece.
Absolutely. And then her play, The Mousetrap, opened in 1952 and remains the longest-running play in human history.
She passed away in 1976.
So by the time 1979 rolls around, the publisher is gathering these disparate stories just to give the British public one last new Marple release. But does that marketing strategy dilute the literary value?
Not necessarily dilute it, but it changes our expectations. By calling them the final cases, we are primed to look for the wisdom of an author at the end of her life, when in reality we are reading the sharp, mid-career experimentation of an author at the height of her powers.
So we're essentially reading Prime Christie mislabeled as Sunset Christie.
Exactly. The brand of Jane Marple completely eclipses the reality of the publishing timeline, and it serves as a brilliant opening lesson for our deep dive today. You must always question the label.
The cover of the book itself is an exercise in critical thinking.
It is. I'd ask you, the listener, to consider how often you accept a title or a beautifully packaged piece of information at absolute face value without looking at the historical context. Christie's legacy machinery is teaching us to look closer before we even read the first page.
That idea of a deceptive label, of something appearing as one thing while functioning as another, perfectly mirrors the first major theme in the collection. Let's dive into the illusion of the perfect servant.
The case of the perfect maid in Miss Marple tells a story.
Yes, let's start with the perfect maid, because it exposes a massive societal blind spot. We have these two sisters, the Skinners. They live in a divided flat in Old Hall in St. Mary Mead.
Lavinia is the practical one.
Right, gaunt, gruff, working member of the family. And Emily is the classic, weaponized hypochondriac.
Just spending all her time in a dark room complaining.
Exactly, demanding weak tea with lemon and holding the household hostage. They have a local village maid, Gladys, who is a bit loud but fundamentally honest. Then Lavinia fires Gladys with extreme prejudice because a brooch goes missing.
Even though the brooch miraculously turns up again almost immediately.
But the damage is done. Gladys's reputation is ruined.
And this seemingly minor domestic dispute causes a real stir in the village, because Miss Marple operates on a completely different data set than the upper-class residents.
She actually knows Gladys's family.
Right. She knows the socioeconomic reality of the village, and she knows the girl is honest. Miss Marple even advocates for her, but Lavinia Skinner shuts her down aggressively.
Hinting that Gladys is an inherent thief.
Which brings us to the deception. The Skinners hire a new maid, Mary Higgins, who is presented as an absolute paragon of domestic service.
The perfect maid. Impeccable references, crisp white apron, cooks beautifully.
Turns the heavy mattresses every single day without complaint, and is incredibly patient with the relentless hypochondriac Emily.
But Miss Marple's whole methodology is based on the premise that human nature is flawed. So when she hears about someone flawed,
her internal alarms go off. She is deeply skeptical of anything too good to be true.
So she sets a trap. She visits Old Hall, meets Mary Higgins, and purposefully drops her purse, spilling everything on the floor.
Including a sticky piece of striped peppermint rock.
Yes, a piece she had confiscated from a local village child. Mary, being the perfect servant, politely picks it all up.
And a few days later, disaster strikes. Mary Higgins vanishes in the dead of night.
Taking all the Skinner's jewels, plus the jewels in cash of all the other tenants in the building, she had copied the master keys.
The local police, led by Inspector Slack, assume they are dealing with a highly sophisticated professional gang. The references were forged.
And they are totally stymied because they can't find a single fingerprint. Mary wore rubber gloves for all her chores.
Which was completely normalized behavior for a maid.
But Miss Marple walks into the police station and presents Slack with a small hand mirror from her purse.
That dropped purse was a brilliant forensic trap.
She intentionally got Mary Higgins to handle that sticky peppermint rock, transferring the sugar to her fingers, and then had her pick up the mirror.
Capturing the perfect fingerprints of a woman who thought she had sanitized the crime scene.
It's so satisfying. But the psychological deduction is even better. The police are looking for a rogue maid. But Miss Marple points out a glaring anomaly. Emily Skinner is a hypochondriac, but she never actually calls for a doctor.
Because if a trained medical professional examined her, he'd instantly see there was nothing physically wrong with her.
Exactly. Furthermore, nobody in the village has ever seen Emily Skinner and Mary Higgins in the same room at the same time.
The perfect maid, Mary Higgins, with her rosy cheeks and dark hair,
is actually the pale, whining Emily Skinner wearing a wig, makeup, and a uniform. The two sisters were a highly coordinated team of professional thieves running a long con on their neighbors.
What's fascinating here is how Christie is openly dissecting class blindness. Working-class women in uniform were essentially rendered invisible by the social hierarchy.
Perceived as a function, not a human being.
The Skinner sisters fully understood this blind spot. They knew that if one of them put on the apron, the other residents wouldn't see a woman, they would merely see the maid.
They banked on the arrogance of their own class. And it makes you wonder if that invisibility still happens today. Because we see that exact same psychological trick utilized in Miss Marple tells a story.
The locked room scenario.
Right. Mr. Rhodes is accused of stabbing his wife in a hotel room. He was working in the adjoining room, door A. The hallway door to his wife's room, door B, was bolted from the inside.
The only person seen going in and out of door A by witnesses was a chambermaid bringing a hot water bottle.
Naturally, the police assume Mr. Rhodes is lying to cover his own tracks.
because physically, no one else could have committed the murder without being seen. But Miss Marple interrogates the perception of the witnesses. She asks Mr. Rhodes and his lawyer to describe the chambermaid.
And neither of them can provide a single facial feature.
They saw the institutional uniform, the archetype, not the face. Based on this, Miss Marple deduces the true sequence of events. A woman named Miss Carruthers, who held a severe grudge against Mrs. Rhodes, simply waited in the hallway.
When the real chambermaid left, Miss Carruthers slipped in, stabbed Mrs. Rhodes, locked the hallway door from the inside,
Creating the locked room illusion.
and then casually walked out right through Mr. Rhodes's adjoining room.
How? Because she had slipped on a standard chambermaid's dress and wig. Mr. Rhodes looked up, saw the uniform, registered that the chambermaid was leaving, and went back to work.
The witnesses in the lounge saw a chambermaid enter and later saw a chambermaid leave, completely failing to realize they were looking at two entirely different women.
Utilizing the exact same social camouflage, Miss Marple cracks both of these cases specifically because she actually does see the working class as individuals. She recognizes that the upper classes just look right past the uniform.
We really have to ask ourselves how often we experience this exact phenomenon of inattentional blindness in our own daily lives.
How often do we fail to truly see the delivery driver, the barista, the sanitation worker? We register the uniform, but filter out the human being.
Christie is warning us that when we stop seeing people as individuals, our own arrogance becomes the weapon used against us. Speaking of things that blend seamlessly into the background, let's look at the danger of the everyday object in tape measure murder.
A quintessential village mystery with a remarkably dark execution.
Mrs. Spenlow is found brutally strangled on her own hearthrug. The local police, led by Inspector Slack, immediately zeroes in on the husband, Mr. Spenlow.
Slack embodies institutional arrogance. His reasoning is fatally based on normative societal expectations of grief.
Right, because when the police inform Mr. Spenlow, he displays absolutely zero emotion. He's this stiff former jeweler who just wants to go sit in his garden and plant a pergola.
Slack argues that Mr. Spenlow is guilty as hell because it isn't natural for an innocent man to display a total lack of affect. He inherits her money, shows no remorse, therefore he did it.
But Miss Marple rejects that premise. She points out that some people process severe shock with a complete emotional shutdown. The real clues are in the physical details of the crime scene.
Specifically, Mrs. Spenlow was found wearing a kimono.
Yes. To the male police officers, a woman in a kimono in the middle of the day suggests something illicit, a crime of passion.
But to Miss Marple, viewing it through the lens of village domesticity, a kimono means one highly specific thing. She was preparing for a dress fitting.
She didn't want to mess up her hair by pulling a dress over her head. And who had an appointment with her? Ms. Pollitt, the seemingly meek village dressmaker.
The mechanics of the crime are chillingly mundane. Miss Pollitt arrived, began the fitting, and while pretending to take measurements around Mrs. Spenlow's neck, simply crossed the ends of her heavy-duty tape measure and pulled sharply.
An improvised garrote.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then she calmly walked out, pulled the front door shut, and stood on the front porch knocking loudly,
Performing a pantomime of having just arrived.
ensuring a nosy neighbor saw her waiting there to establish a rock-solid alibi.
Here's where it gets really interesting. There is a physical clue left at the scene. Constable Pock spots a pin on the floor near the body. Instead of bagging it, he picks it up and sticks it into his lapel for good luck.
A completely throwaway moment to the police.
But Ms. Marple notices it. She explains that it isn't an ordinary household pin. To man's eye, a pin is a pin. But to a woman who sews, it is a highly specialized, exceptionally thin dressmaker's pin.
The exact kind you buy by the box if you are a professional seamstress.
The presence of that pin definitively proves Miss Pollitt was inside the house, leaning over the body. It shatters her alibi.
And Miss Marple unearths the why, which brings a massive historical scope to the murder. Years ago, Mrs. Spenlow was a lowly tweenie maid, and Miss Pollitt was a high-ranking lady's maid.
In the same grand estate where a massive emerald robbery took place.
They were accomplices, but Mrs. Spenlow took her share, invested in a flower shop, and grew wealthy. Miss Pollitt squandered hers and ended up a destitute village dressmaker.
So pure coincidence brought them to the same village, and Miss Pollitt's resentment boiled over. The juxtaposition is fantastic. The murder weapon wasn't a revolver, it was a tape measure.
The deadly clue was a microscopic pin.
It reminds you that the most dangerous elements often blend perfectly into the background. A tape measure around your neck feels totally normal.
Right up until the exact millisecond that it isn't. Context dictates our perception of threat. Our brains identify anomalies. A drawn knife is an anomaly. A tape measure in a seamstress's hands is harmonious with the environment.
Criminals utilize the ordinary to mask the extraordinary. But while Miss Pollitt succeeds by being entirely unremarkable, other killers do the exact opposite. Let's explore Section 4, the theatricality of murder.
Looking at Greenshaw's Volley and the Case of the Caretaker.
Both are highly elaborate stage plays designed for an audience of manipulated witnesses. In Greenshaw's Folly, we have this bizarre house. Miss Greenshaw hires a young widow, Lou, to type up diaries in the locked library.
Ostensibly so she won't be disturbed.
Right. And Lou looks out the window and sees Miss Greenshaw stagger out onto the patio with a hunting arrow driven straight through her throat. She screams, "He shot me," and dies.
It's an incredibly visceral, highly dramatic scene, designed to shock the witness.
The housekeeper, Mrs. Cresswell, is also locked in her room upstairs, and a police constable happens to arrive almost instantly.
The investigation zeroes in on Alfred the gardener. He has a financial motive and is an expert archer.
But Alfred has a rock-solid alibi. At the exact moment Lou saw the arrow strike, Alfred was sitting in the local pub with credible witnesses. So how do you shoot a woman with an arrow from a pub miles away?
You don't. Miss Marple rejects the theatrical spectacle. She realizes the woman Lou saw staggering wasn't the real Miss Greenshaw.
Because of the garden. Miss Marple examines the flower beds where Miss Greenshaw was supposedly weeding. The person weeding had pulled up precious cultivated plants alyssum, saxifrage, and campanula right along with the actual weeds.
The real Miss Greenshaw was an expert gardener. She would never destroy her own prized flowers. The person kneeling there didn't know the difference between an expensive campanula and a common dandelion.
The level of theatricality is astounding. The entire murder was a collaborative performance between the housekeeper, Mrs. Cresswell, and her actor son, Nat Fletcher,
who played the role of the arriving police constable.
The sequence of events is a dark magic trick. Mrs. Cresswell drugged the real Miss Greenshaw indoors. Then the housekeeper put on a wig, dressed in Miss Greenshaw's clothes, and went out into the garden to be seen by the typist,
establishing her presence. Then she staged the grand finale.
Faked being shot with a prop arrow, staggered inside, locked herself in her room for an alibi, and waited for her actor son to arrive in his stolen police costume.
It was Nat, the fake policeman, who actually drove a real arrow into the neck of the unconscious Miss Greenshaw before the real authorities arrived.
They put on a multi-act play to frame the gardener. It's diabolical, and we see almost the exact same utilization of grand distraction in the Case of the Caretaker.
Harry Laxton, the village scapegrace, returns triumphant with a beautiful, exceptionally wealthy but highly nervous young bride named Louise.
Harry buys his grandchildhood home, completely ignoring that the property comes with an old caretaker, Mrs. Murgatroyd. Harry abruptly evicts her.
And in retaliation, Mrs. Murgatroyd begins a campaign of terror. She stands by the road, shaking her fist, screaming dark curses at the young bride.
It deeply terrifies Louise, who believes she's genuinely cursed. One afternoon, Louise rides out on her horse. Witnesses say the old woman jumps out, shrieking a curse. The horse bolts. Louise is thrown to the ground and dies.
On the surface, everyone assumes it's a tragic accident caused by a vindictive old woman.
But Dr. Haydock, Miss Marple's friend, is on the scene. Harry Laxton throws himself onto the sofa in an absolute paroxysm of grief, weeping, wailing, thrashing about.
A massive theatrical display of sorrow.
But during this performance, Dr. Haydock notices a small hypodermic syringe fall out of Harry's pocket and wedge into the sofa cushions.
Suspicious of the acting and the syringe, the doctor performs an autopsy. He discovers Louise didn't die from the fall. She died from a massive dose of strophanthin,
a deadly poison that induces heart failure. Harry Laxton is a cold-blooded sociopath. He murdered his rich wife to inherit her fortune. But the genius of the plan is the cover story.
He didn't just hope the horse would throw her. He actually paid the old caretaker to act like a witch and publicly curse them.
He funded the harassment. He meticulously created this undeniable spectacle of the cursed bride. So when he finally injected her with the lethal strophanthin right before her ride, her inevitable fall from the horse would be blamed on the old woman.
The curse was a smokescreen for the poison. This is a terrifying exploration of the principle of misdirection. When someone desperately wants you to look at a spectacle, a screaming witch, or an old woman with an arrow in her neck,
your absolute first instinct should be to look away from the flash.
Look for the quiet, unlit corners of the stage. The syringe slipping out of a pocket, the wrong weeds being pulled up. The truth is almost always hiding in the mundane details they couldn't fully control.
But sometimes the misdirection isn't a massive visual spectacle. Sometimes the puzzle relies on us tripping over our own assumptions, which leads perfectly into Section 5, puzzles, linguistics, and subverted expectations.
Strange jest. A fundamentally delightful story compared to the darker murders.
We meet Edward and Charmian, two desperate young people. They're eccentric, highly suspicious, and wealthy. Uncle Matthew has died. He promised them his vast fortune, but left almost nothing in his bank accounts.
But they know he converted his massive fortune into solid gold bullion to avoid banks, because he constantly lectured them that the only truly safe place for money was in a box under the bed or buried in the garden.
Taking his words at face value, the young couple has essentially destroyed the family estate looking for this buried gold. They've dug massive trenches in the gardens, ripped up the cellar floor, tapped the wainscoting,
They even hired a cabinet maker to dismantle his antique desk.
and found nothing. In a last-ditch effort, they invite Miss Marple, not as a murder investigator, but as a solver of obscure puzzles. They tell her the only clue they have. Before Uncle Matthew died, he chuckled, said, "You'll be all right, my pretty pair of doves," tapped his right eye, gave a pronounced wink, and passed away.
The only other physical evidence is from a secret drawer in the desk. A bizarre recipe for baked ham, and a bundle of sappy love letters addressed to a female missionary named Betty Martin.
Edward thinks the letters are written in invisible ink, but Miss Marple just chuckles. She approaches the problem completely differently.
She analyzes the psychology of the puzzle maker. Uncle Matthew deeply enjoyed obvious practical jokes, puns, and deliberately subverting expectations. She realizes the literal search for buried gold is entirely wrong.
Instead, she analyzes the linguistics. She looks at the baked ham recipe. It calls for cloves and brown sugar, but fundamentally, a recipe for baked ham is a recipe for ham and greens, or, in the popular Victorian slang of Uncle Matthew's youth, gammon and spinach.
And in that era, the phrase gammon and spinach translated directly to nonsense or humbug.
I love that linguistic twist. And she applies that exact same knowledge to the letters addressed to the missionary Betty Martin. It's not a real woman. It's a reference to the phrase, "All my eye am Betty Martin,"
Another Victorian idiom meaning a hoax or a deliberate deception.
which links beautifully to Uncle Matthew tapping his right eye. He was literally telling them, using the slang of his youth, "It's all my eye and Betty Martin." The letters are fakes, the recipe is a fake, the buried gold is a fake.
But if the contents are fake, where is the money? This is where Miss Marple employs lateral thinking. She draws on knowledge from her great-nephew Lionel, an obsessive stamp collector.
Right, because while the letters are a distraction, the envelopes they were mailed in are very real.
The envelopes bear genuine 1851 blue 2-cent stamps. In the philatelic world, those are incredibly rare, worth around $25,000 each.
Uncle Matthew didn't bury gold bullion. He converted his wealth into lightweight stamps and hid his immense fortune in plain sight, stuck to the outside of fake letters. It's such an elegant subversion of expectations.
They took him entirely, literally, and nearly destroyed their own home digging up the garden. This raises an important question for you, the listener. How often do we fail to solve complex problems because we take instructions too literally?
When society tells you to look for buried treasure, do you only grab a shovel? Do you only look for gold?
Lateral thinking is the vital ability to step back from the literal interpretation and analyze the framework of the problem itself.
That's a profound lesson in cognitive flexibility. But while Strange Just is lighthearted, Christie doesn't shy away from what people will do for that kind of concentrated wealth.
The darkness in human nature takes a darker turn in Section 6.
Yes, Sanctuary. This narrative explores the absolute extremes of human behavior, juxtaposing the safety of the village with the violent greed of the outside world.
It opens with Bunch Harmon, the pragmatic wife of the vicar. She goes into her dark church to arrange chrysanthemums and discovers a man dying on the chancel steps.
He's been shot in the chest. As he bleeds out, he clutches his shabby coat and gasps one single word: sanctuary. It's a deeply symbolic opening image.
The sanctity of the church violated by modern violence. The police discover he had no ID. Shortly after, a very flashy couple arrives at the vicarage, Mr. and Mrs. Eccles.
They claim the dead man is Mrs. Eccles' brother, William, and they are aggressively eager to collect his personal belongings, specifically the shabby, blood-stained coat.
But Bunch Harmon is a keen observer. Her intuition screams that their grief is fake.
Bunch is an amazing character, really serving as an active proxy for Miss Marple. She notices a crucial discrepancy. The dead man's watch has the initials W.S. engraved on it, and the inscription reads, "To Walter from his father."
But the Ecclesias keep referring to him as William or Bill. A loving sister wouldn't repeatedly get her own brother's actual given name wrong.
Exactly. And Bunch remembers the dying man frantically fumbling with the lining of his coat. So before she hands it over, she carefully unpicks the stitching of the lining. She finds a tiny piece of stiff paper sewn inside.
A standard cloakroom ticket for a piece of luggage checked at Paddington Station in London.
Recognizing she is out of her depth, Bunch takes the ticket directly to Miss Marple.
Miss Marple immediately recognizes the grave physical danger Bunch is in. The Ecclesies are violent criminals who will realize the ticket is missing and use whatever force necessary to get it.
It is here that Miss Marple unpacks the concept of true sanctuary versus false appearances. The dying man, Walter St. John, was an escaped convict, but he broke out of prison to seek sanctuary for someone else, an innocent.
And to protect that innocent party, Miss Marple and Bunch hatch a high-stakes plan. Miss Marple doesn't call the police. She takes direct action.
She sends her former maid with a decoy suitcase to Paddington Station. The maid presents the real ticket, retrieves Walter's actual suitcase, and checks the decoy suitcase in its place.
Leaving behind a new ticket.
Punchal then takes this new ticket, picks up the decoy suitcase, and makes a public show of taking the train back to the village. The Ecclesies followed her, of course.
As soon as Bunch steps off the train, a well-dressed man violently snatches the luggage from her hands.
But Miss Marple had the local village constable waiting in ambush. The thief tries to lie, claiming he's a theatrical costumer. But when forced to open the suitcase on the platform, there is no treasure.
Just Miss Marple's old, humiliating speckled tweed coat and a moth-eaten beaver collar.
The thief is totally humiliated, his cover blown, and he flees empty-handed. But the reality behind the crime is profoundly tragic. Inspector Craddock reveals that Walter was married to a famous music hall dancer named Zobeida.
Zobeida possessed a priceless, legendary emerald necklace. Knowing criminals were circling, she had the real flawless stones removed from their settings and sewn directly into the fabric of her gaudy theatrical costume.
She wore her wealth openly on stage, disguised as cheap glass rhinestones. When she died, Walter, desperate to secure his orphan daughter Jewel's future, escaped prison to retrieve the costume.
But he was tracked down and fatally shot by the Eccles gang, who had deduced where the gems were hidden.
And the reason Walter dragged himself to that specific remote church was because the elderly couple, secretly fostering his daughter, lived right there. He was trying to bring her the fortune.
Miss Marple pries open the actual suitcase, rips the lining of the theatrical dress, and it's like opening Aladdin's cave. Priceless emeralds cascading out.
This raises an important question regarding morality and courage. You have the Eccles gang, driven by violent greed, willing to murder a desperate father.
And on the other side, Bunch Harmon and Jane Marple, exhibiting quiet, profound, almost reckless bravery, risking their own safety to protect the inheritance of an orphaned child they've never met.
Christie is arguing that true sanctuary isn't a physical place, it's an active verb, the actions of good people shielding the innocent. It gives me absolute chills.
And speaking of chills, that darkness in human nature is pushed even further in Section 7. The eerie psychological outliers.
We are leaving cozy deduction behind and shifting to the two non-Marple stories, The Dressmaker's Doll and In a Glass Darkly. Agatha Christie's tonal range here is incredible. Let's talk about The Dressmaker's Doll.
A masterclass in building claustrophobic tension. It takes place in a highly stressed London dressmaking shop run by Alicia Coombe and her forewoman, Sybil.
They suddenly notice a doll lounging on a green velvet sofa in their fitting room. Not a child's toy. A long, limp, decadently dressed velvet puppet with a cynical, painted face.
A client complains that the doll gives her the creeps, stating its painted eyes look like they are actively watching her undress. Alicia and Sybil realize they have absolutely no idea where the doll came from.
It simply manifested. And then the nightmare really begins. The doll starts moving. The cleaning woman finds it sitting upright at the main desk, posed like a human writing a letter.
The staff are genuinely terrified and deny touching it. Then it's found on the window seat looking out at the street, then sprawled on the floor.
The psychological pressure builds to a breaking point. Alicia locks the fitting room door, but the implied presence becomes so overwhelming they abandon the room entirely. Finally, in a panic, they physically rid themselves of it. They throw it out the window into the busy London street.
And the climax shifts the story from a ghost story to a profound psychological commentary. A ragged, impoverished girl on the street below picks it up.
Alicia screams, "You've killed her!" Terrified, the demonic doll will possess the child.
But the little girl just clutches the velvet doll and says with complete innocence she wants to be loved and runs off happily. The two women are forced to confront the realization that their terror was entirely self-generated.
Was the doll moving under supernatural power? Or was the stress of the business causing the women to move it subconsciously in fugue states?
Christie is brilliantly exploring the psychological phenomenon of projection. The velvet doll wasn't inherently evil. It became an empty vessel that absorbed and reflected back the severe neuroses and latent hysteria of the women.
And that exact idea of the mind manifesting its own worst fears is at the core of our final story, In a Glass Darkly. A young man is visiting a country house before World War I. He looks into an antique mirror and experiences a hyper-realistic hallucination.
The mirror reflects a room down the hall, and he clearly sees a man with a jagged scar on the left side of his face, brutally strangling a beautiful blonde woman.
He rushes to intervene, but the woman, Sylvia, is perfectly fine. But then he looks at her fiancé. The fiancé is a tall, dark man with a jagged scar on the left side of his face.
The narrator is instantly convinced he has experienced a premonition of a future murder. He privately warns Sylvia. She breaks off the engagement.
And eventually, the narrator and Sylvia fall in love and marry. It seems like he saved her. But during World War I, the narrator gets severely wounded in the face by shrapnel.
When he returns, his deep-seated pathological jealousy begins to eat away at their marriage. In a fit of paranoid rage over a man named Derek Wainwright, the narrator attacks Sylvia.
He throws her onto the bed, wraps his hands around her throat, and begins to strangle her. But as he's committing the act, he catches sight of his own reflection in the bedroom mirror. Because of his war wound, he now has a jagged scar on his face.
And the absolute horror of the truth hits him. He realizes the antique mirror in the guest room had reversed the image. He didn't see Sylvia's fiancé with a scar on his left cheek. He saw himself with a scar on his right cheek, strangling her in the future.
It's a devastating exploration of the self-fulfilling prophecy. Did the vision show an unavoidable future? Or did the vision itself cause the future?
By seeing the vision, he intervened and married Sylvia himself. And his own inherent toxic jealousy turned him into the exact monster he saw in the glass. He releases her, realizing the devil of jealousy was the true villain all along.
Christie is showing us that the most terrifying supernatural force isn't a ghost. It is the darkness and capacity for violence we carry within our own minds. Wow, what an incredibly intense journey through Miss Marple's Final Cases book by Agatha Christie.
We've covered a lot of ground.
From deceptive labels to locked room mysteries, everyday tape measures turned into weapons, theatrical archery, Victorian slang, and violent thieves thwarted by a vicar's wife. So, what does this all mean? We started by saying the quaint English village is actually a microcosm of the world.
It means fundamentally that knowledge is most valuable when it is understood and actively applied to our own lives. Agatha Christie isn't just giving us clever puzzles, she is giving us a sharp, analytical lens through which to view reality.
Miss Marple's superpower isn't modern forensics.
No, her ultimate superpower is her deep, unflinching understanding of human nature. She knows people are exactly the same everywhere. The core drivers, greed, fear, jealousy, love never change.
By paying attention to the small anomalies, we can uncover profound truths.
We must apply this methodology. Look closer at your own environment. Who is currently invisible to you? What assumptions are you making about people based solely on how things appear on the surface?
That's exactly it. Taking the blinders off and opening our eyes to the reality of the people around us.
We've talked a lot today about mirrors, disguises, misdirection, and the vital things we fail to see. But I want you to consider this final thought. When Miss Marple looks at a brutal murderer, she almost always compares them to a naughty, selfish child from her village who stole a piece of candy. What if the evil in the world isn't some grand supernatural force, but just the ordinary, petty selfishness we all carry inside us, allowed to grow unchecked by empathy? The next time you look in the mirror, ask yourself not just who you are right now, but who you might be capable of becoming if you pushed your own humanity aside and let the shadows take over.
That is a chilling thought that will definitely stick with me for a long time. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the source material. We hope it sparked your curiosity, challenged your assumptions, and made you look at the world just a little bit closer. Until next time, keep questioning the narrative, keep observing the details, and keep learning.